on this Friday morning. We're using Teams live events to broadcast this presentation, and those of you who've joined us online can ask questions. You'll see that there's actually a Q&A section, so by all means, if anything does crop up, please just enter it straight into there, and I will deal with it as soon as I can. So, the cloud adoption framework. This is something that, there we go. Really, excuse me 1 second, the slideshow seems to not be moving forward. Oh, there we go. Sorry, that took longer than anticipated. So, cloud adoption framework. This is based actually on Microsoft's framework. All of the public cloud providers do have their own version of a framework, as indeed do many third parties. We've actually curated a number of these, and what we've done is we've chosen Microsoft for a number of reasons. In particular, we like the balance that it strikes between the weight of it and the depth of it. So, you know, it's not too heavyweight, but it does have sufficient detail to make sure that you capture all of the important aspects that you're going to need in order to define a successful strategy. In particular, particularly because now with BDO and C5, we have an advisory and technology business that have come together. We're particularly keen on the governance and the management elements of this. And those are elements which are often not necessarily left out, but perhaps underplayed by some of the other frameworks. So what we've done is we've taken the Microsoft one and we've tweaked it based on our experience. So today, the purpose of this presentation is to focus on the first step within that framework, which is to define strategy. So if anyone was expecting something else, probably now would be the time to disappear quietly. Strategy. So the first thing I wanted to say about strategy is it's all about getting the size right. There can be a tendency to value a strategy almost based on its size, as though more is better. Yeah, the approach we take, strategy should not be war and peace. Okay, there is a tendency to pad these things out, and our recommendation, our advice is always that you keep focused and that you deliver what you need to do, because moving to the cloud, a lot of the benefit of moving to the cloud is around agility. So some of the outcomes, some of the benefits that people will look to is I want to go to the cloud because it allows me to operate more quickly, more nimbly, to seize opportunities. There would be a certain irony if creating the strategy to enable you to be nimble took you 6 months. Obviously, the size of the strategy as well depends on your stakeholders. So, yeah, if your CEO is somebody who just wants to get things done, he wants to know what is the exec summary, then that's fantastic. You can keep it nice and light. If perhaps he's a bit more wordy, then yes, you will maybe have to build that out. But really, you know, the point of a strategy is to get all of the elements across in as few words, as succinctly and as comprehensively as possible. So don't feel that, you know, before you can move to the cloud, you've got to write an 80-page document. What you need to do is make sure you've dotted the I's and crossed the T's, but it can be much simpler than that, so don't be put off. So the strategy stage of the cloud adoption framework, this is how it's split out. So we start with the why. What are the motivations? Why do we want to move to the cloud? Then we move on to what. What do we want from this? What are we trying to achieve? How are we going to do it? What is the approach we're going to take? And so we take the why, the what, the how. We then add to that the risks, the benefits, the financial modeling, and we produce a business case. And then at the end, we identify the first cloud adoption project. And when we do that, and we'll talk about this obviously towards the end, we take an approach called minimum viable commit. And I think it's really important that we do this as part of strategy, because typically your strategy would end and you would then move into the planning phase, at which point you would then deal with, okay, what are we going to do first? Let's set out our plan, let's set out our priorities. Because of the potential impact of this first project, because it needs to be successful, because it needs to show value, that's why you want to build it into the strategy phase and say, actually, it's really important that we define that first step before we move on to plan, so that we've agreed, the stakeholders are on board, we've demonstrated that we're going to achieve the outcomes, they've signed off on the risks, and this is what we're going to do first. So we look at each of these areas in turn. Motivations. Why are we doing it? So the motivations obviously come from the stakeholders. And different stakeholders are going to have different motivations. So for example, if we take a stereotypical CFO, he's going to care about costs. Alongside him, the CEO, probably going to care about growth and innovation. A COO may be focused on operational improvements. What's really important when we're looking at motivations is to understand two things. Firstly, we're not looking for consensus. So we're not saying, okay, this strategy needs 3 motivations, let's choose 3. Nor is it looking for consensus on those. It's really around understanding who the stakeholders are and what is driving them to want to move to the cloud. And of course, when you look at motivations, there's kind of 2 things here, because actually, for example, the CFO might not have a motivator as such. You know, he doesn't want to move to the cloud. However, he's going to say, what's in it for me? And so there's that conversation to be had about explaining some of those benefits and why you're doing it. And if he says, well, why am I embarking on this project that's going to cost me X thousands of pounds? And then you have that discussion about, well, because of potential cost savings. Perhaps the CFO may be concerned about compliance, and you can demonstrate how a cloud-based solution can improve compliance. So there is a conversation to be had with each and every stakeholder, but generally that is done individually because everybody has their view. And as I say, we aren't trying to get everybody to agree on one picture. So we categorize motivations in 3 ways. We have critical events, migration motivations, and innovation motivations. Critical events, kind of one of the, probably the one that we see the most of in terms of people aligning their cloud adoption. So that would be around, for example, a hardware refresh. So if you've sort of done your typical, I bought a load of infrastructure, it's on a 5-year cycle, that 5-year cycle is coming to an end. Do I want to invest in another 5 years worth of infrastructure? Maybe that's the driver towards the cloud adoption. And those events are often external. Regulatory change is probably a big one, particularly in the environment that we are within the Channel Islands, and the amount of financial services offerings that there are, there is heavy regulation around that, and that does change. And that is another key driver for why people would do this. But moving then to the left, we have what we called migration events. And this is really about driving improvement. So doing what we do today, but doing it slightly differently, doing it within the cloud. And so we would be looking to save some money. We might be able to improve some processes because we've reduced technical complexity. Potentially, we've made life easier, say, for the IT team because we've reduced that technical complexity. Innovation is more about facilitating change, doing something new, enabling agility within the organization. And this would probably come under, sort of the digital transformation banner. So this would be maybe, you'd expect maybe the CEO to have more motivations in this category. With the migrate, the impact of that is operational, it's management, it's governance, it's finance. With the innovation, it's more of a vertical impact. It cuts through the business. So migration, not so much the business in terms of the products and the services that you deliver. Innovation, very much focused on that. So that's going to impact your customer, the customer facing staff within your business. So that's then bringing us into these cross-discipline teams where perhaps we're introducing new services into new markets, and we need people from the business, we need people from operations, we need people from IT, we need people from governance, all to be working together to take joint responsibility for delivering that new service. So we categorize these events and the motivations, and what you're looking for really is the trends. So am I mostly being driven by critical events or migration motivators, or am I being driven by innovation motivators? And the reason that's important is later on in the cloud adoption framework, when we move to the adopt phase, we will deal with the strategy that we take at that point, or the approach that we take at that point will differ. So we will either follow a migrate strategy or an innovate one. I probably don't want to steal the thunder of a future presentation when somebody talks about this, but as I say, the migrate is more around breaking it down, doing multiple waves of assess the workload, deploy the workload, release the workload. The innovate approach to cloud migration is that vertical impact and impacting a slice through the whole business and looking at the risks and putting in a lot more governance around it because it's something new, as opposed to the migration, which is tend to be more of a lift and shift approach. So we've discussed with our stakeholders what their motivations are, and we've mapped them, and we've now got an idea of what's driving this. So we then need to look at what it is we want to get out of this, what sort of outcomes. And the outcomes are obviously key from a change management point of view, in terms of driving understanding into the business as to why we're doing this. So this slide talks about what we'd call the fiscal outcomes. And it's not just as simple as we want to make more money, and there's different ways of making more money, clearly. Do we want to do what we do now, but more of it? Do we want to do what we do now, but with less cost? Do we want to do something different? Do we want to do what we do now, but in different areas, in different markets? So it's really important to understand what it is we're trying to achieve, because we're going to take a lot of people on a journey as we do this. And it's important for them to understand why we're doing it. And as we see here, under cost, do we reduce cost? Do we switch from CapEx to OpEx? Which it is certainly the majority of businesses prefer that model because you don't have that upfront cost, which is often facilitated through credit, and also it gives you a clear indication of your scalability costs, i.e. if I add 10 new people, I get 10 times my per person cost, as opposed to the CapEx approach where I have a large upfront investment and a ceiling for how far that will scale. Avoidance, yeah, we talked about that, you know, as a critical event. That's the big one that pulls the trigger. It's often not the people are wanting to get more from the cloud, but that's the point at which they say, now we want to do it. My equipment needs refreshing, my support needs renewal, my data center contract needs renewing, and that's what will drive it. Other types of outcomes, global outcomes, so access, whether that's deploying to new teams, so you're taking on someone in another jurisdiction and they need to be accessing your systems, maybe that you want to deliver services to customers in new regions. Data sovereignty, data privacy is rightly so a very big issue. If your data center is here in Jersey and you want to take on a company in the US, how's that going to work with data privacy? How are you going to keep that separation? How are you going to deal with any legal requests that come in? So, you know, the cloud can help you keep your EU data in the EU, your US data in the US, Jersey in Jersey, or however it is you need to split it. And we've got other types of outcomes, service outcomes, you know, more performance, it's more reliable, improved security, reduced maintenance costs in terms of IT maintenance. Yeah, the types of outcomes are many and varied, but in terms of putting together a business case, those have to be spelled out, because of course the project will be measured based on the benefits that are ultimately realized by it. So at this point, that's what we're looking to set out, is what are we hoping to get from this? So the approach. So how are we going to do this? I think this part is really important. Start with setting expectations, and to an extent, this is almost about countering the expectations that people have in mind on the outset. So people will say, oh, the cloud is cheaper. My expectation is cloud is going to be cheaper. And actually, in the main, you know, the vast majority, it is. But it isn't always. It's not guaranteed. People will say everything should go to the cloud. I assume this cloud adoption means we're just going to take everything. Well, no. You're going to look at it on an application by application basis, on a service by service basis. It's going to be based on who are the users, who are the clients, what are the risks, what's the technology. If you put everything in the cloud, that's one of the reasons why and where the cloud may get more expensive, particularly because if you're just replicating your internal infrastructure, you are, because when you buy internal infrastructure, you have to buy it for peak performance. So you have to buy it for the peak level. So the once a month, the once a quarter, the once a year reporting cycle, or whatever it is that causes your systems to max out, that's what you scale it on. But the problem is, the other 90% of the time, it's only running at 40% capacity. So what you do when you move to the cloud is you don't want to say, I need to buy something that meets my peak performance all of the time. I want something that meets my 40% and then scales up, and the cost increases with it at the point at which I need it. And then when I no longer need it, it scales back and the price reduces. Similarly, OPEX is better than CapEx. Again, typically it is. But it depends what business you're in, and it depends what the business strategy is. Some areas look at capital assets as a benefit. A lower OPEX might be desirable depending on what your business strategy is. If you're looking to reduce the cost of goods, yeah, you probably want lower operating costs. So it's not, these things aren't guaranteed. So setting that expectations is partially about dispelling the myths. And those are the conversations you should be having with the stakeholders when you're talking to them about what are your motivations, what do you want to get out of this, and then what do you expect. We then define principles. I'm a really big advocate of this approach. I think it sets out, it's nice to set out some very broad rules that say, this is how we're going to approach this. And that could be things like, our principle is everything we do has to be mobile enabled. That means, you know, we see remote working as essential. We know that people are going to be using smartphone and tablet devices. I don't want a cloud solution that means our operators, our staff, whoever is using that system, either on the front end or the back end, have to have their laptop with them or a particular device other than their own mobile. Other principles would be things like, we're not going to be first adopters. Now you would put some metrics around that and you say, do you know what? We will not take on a new service until it's been in production for at least X months or 12 months or whatever it is. And instead, we will follow a simple assess, trial, adopt process. Another principle that I'm personally a big fan of will be something along the lines of, we buy services, not software, which says, okay, as a business, we don't want to be managing the hardware that it sits on. We don't want to be upgrading the software. We don't want to be doing anything other than adding users, taking away users, dealing with permissions. So we want to buy a service. And by defining these principles, it starts to build out your checklist for assessing suppliers. So if you've got 5, 6, 7, 8 principles, the first thing you do when you're doing your product service selection is you run through those. Do you support mobile devices? No. All right, great. We'll move on to the next. How old is your technology? How many users do you have? How big is your client base? Who do you have in our market? Oh, nobody. Sorry, we're not for first adopters. So once we've done that, we document the assumptions. Again, this is a broad brush approach because this is a strategy. Okay, this isn't a project plan. This isn't about doing something specific. This is about cloud adoption in general. So what we'll say is that we're going to document the assumptions that, for example, we'll lift and shift everything. Anything that we can't lift and shift, we will find an alternative for. Now, you know, we have a similar example actually in our business. So our tax team use a product that currently runs off a network drive, and we are moving to the cloud. What we haven't done is we haven't stopped our move to the cloud because of this one system. We've flagged it. We've said there's a potential issue here. We have a number of potential solutions for it, but we've prioritized it down the list. We'll work with some of the other elements first. And in fact, by the time we come to it, the supplier themselves, who we've already been discussing this with, may very likely have a solution for this already. So again, you know, we document those assumptions, but we don't want to stop this because of specific issues that we identify. And once we've done the assumptions, the final one would be the constraints. And that's really around things like data sovereignty. I'll keep talking about that, but it is a hot topic at the moment, and rightly so. It might be around resources and knowledge. Again, obviously under assumptions, there may be things around training, where the assumption is, you know, we're going to provide this level of training or this number of people to be trained. Other constraints may be long-running contracts. So you may say, we're going to do a cloud adoption, but our practice management system has another 3 years to run. So we're going to do everything else, but actually we're not going to look at the practice management system for another 24 months until it's got 1 year left on the contract. And that just really gives you that broad overview of how we're going to move forward with the cloud adoption. So we take those elements, we take the motivations, we take the outcomes, we take the approach, we feed it into the business case, and to that business case, we add the risks, the benefits, and the financial modelling. This is the point at which we're going to align it with the business strategy. So the CEO has defined the strategy, he's held a town hall with the staff, people know where the business is heading, what they're trying to achieve. This is the point at which we align it with that. How does cloud adoption fit in with what we're trying to achieve in the wider business? Benefits, again, that just, that builds on top of the outcomes and, talks about when these things will be realized. This is the sort of the start of the benefits realization plan that says, okay, what is cloud adoption going to do for me, and when is it going to do it, and what form is that going to take? Risks, as I've mentioned, are there things that are going to be challenging to move to the cloud? Let's identify those now. Let's not answer those questions, because we want to get this strategy done. We want to be agile, we want to move forward. So let's just document them, get them accepted as part of the business case, and move forward. And the financial modelling, again, this is broad. Okay, we're just looking at, what do we think impact will be on IT? Will we need more staff, or will we need less staff? Will we need the same staff but different skills? What will it do for operations? What will it do in the various areas of the business? Because of course, each project will be individually planned and managed. So we don't need to do that here. And then the final step, as I mentioned, was let's identify that first adoption project. Okay, people may see this, stakeholders may think that cloud adoption in itself is quite risky. So we want to be really careful in that first step that we say, right, this is what we're going to do for the first project. We're going to prove that this works, that it delivers the value that we said it will, and then we will roll out a program of changes going forward. And so when we're choosing it, we're going to look at the size of the project. Okay, when we say MVC here, what we mean is minimum viable commit. Okay, so I want to try this, but how much money, how much staff do I need to commit to making that happen? And how do I continue with business as usual while we're doing it? Also, is it appropriate for testing the organizational alignment plan? Now, that comes out of the next step of the cloud adoption framework, the plan step. And it talks about what are the key roles and how are they going to interact and what are their responsibilities. So as part of cloud adoption, typical key roles would be who's responsible for adoption, who's responsible for governance. And it may also look at things like, particularly if you're following an innovate strategy, how the vertical slicing and the cross-discipline teams work. Look at the risks. If this is your first move to the cloud, you're not going to take your client's data and give it to Amazon or give it to Microsoft or Google. You're going to look at, if this is a critical business event, something's about to fall over or stop working, what's your plan B? Because if it doesn't work, don't put all your eggs in one basket. And probably that first point, use internal users, if you can. If you've got a test platform such as pre-prod, move that into the cloud and learn from it. And that takes us on to the penultimate slide. What are you going to learn from this? Don't do something that's unique, because you're not going to learn anything. So if you have, I'm sure you will have, you should have backup. So your IT systems are being backed up. There are some fantastic cloud platforms out there for doing it, but it's done in one, right? Once you've done it, you've done it. You're not going to do it again. You probably haven't learned a lot, apart from for that specific service. So as a cloud adoption project, it's not great. You also need to do something that's going to be meaningful, worthwhile, so that you can take it forward into other projects. And as we say here, look for something that adds value, ideally through new functionality, but again, That depends if you're following an innovate or a migrate. Because ultimately, if you can say to the CEO, if he asks how the first adoption project has gone and you say, oh, it went great, we've now got backup as a service in the cloud, he won't notice any difference. It won't have impacted him. It won't have impacted really any of the users. Yes, it's a good thing to do. Yes, there'll be some improvements in governance, there'll be improvements in operations, but really it's not something to act as the poster child for this is cloud adoption. And finally, rollback. Let's make sure you've got a plan to roll it back if this doesn't work. So that was really all I wanted to talk about today. Just to say, we've got BDO, who are an advisory company, and we've got C5, who are a technology company. And I think what that allows us to bring is, rather than being an advisory company that will suggest things that are perhaps impractical, unfeasible, or a technology company that are just going to push a particular solution because that's what they sell, we can bring both sides together to look at your business's requirements, to provide our experience, to give the best solution for you that is going to work because we understand the technology side of that as well. And as I say, you can see there, there's lots of areas where we can help you, and we will be delighted to. But as well, we appreciate that there are a lot of talented IT teams out there who will want to do a lot of this themselves, and we're very happy just to have a coffee and a chat to understand how it's going. So if there are any questions, I'll be delighted to take them, and if there aren't, I'd just like to thank you all again for bearing with me. I hope it was useful, and hopefully we will meet again soon.